Airport. They enjoy facilities unmatched by pretty much any other historic aircraft operator I can think of in the amazing Hangar 7 complex. Running in from the west, the Douglas DC-6B, and in trail behind it, the North American B-25J Mitchell. Just as four-engined heavy bombers are rare birds these days in European skies, so too are four-engined, propeller-driven classic airliners. They all served to make this DC-6 a very special performer indeed. The design of the DC-6 started 80 years ago in 1944, initially as a military project for the US Army Air Forces, developing the earlier DC-4 and C-54 Skymaster with a pressurized cabin, greater capacity and more power. Eventually there was no military requirement, so Douglas re-engineered it into the civilian DC-6. Made standard for to be used on domestic and international routes by many major American airlines of the period. It became the first Douglas transport with a seated cruise speed of 300 miles an hour. Delta Airlines was one of the first two carriers to bring it into service, one of the earliest carriers to bring it into service, following on from American and United. They used the slogan, none faster, none finer, to and through the South. And having a pressurized cabin was a real boon because it allowed the DC-6 to get up above the weather. It was developed into the DC-6A, passenger freighter combi model with a cargo door, and then, like this one, the DC-6B, an all-passenger version of that, with a slightly stretched fuselage. Again, there were domestic and transoceanic versions. They could seat up to 89 people, and one real leap forward that was pioneered by the DC-6 came in 1952 when Pan American used it to launch tourist class transatlantic services. Prior to that, there were no affordable means of flying across the Atlantic. Pan American was the first carrier to make that happen, and it was thanks in no small part to this aeroplane, the DC-6. Many other airlines flew them in their heyday. British Eagle and Caledonian flew them. They were also famous being operated by Pan American in West Berlin during the Cold War, before the advent of the Boeing 727. And long after the first jet airliners arrived, DC-6s with their very good operating economics were still favoured by many airlines. The type did end up in military service as the C-118, and to the US Navy initially the R-6D. It was a VC-118 named Independence that was Harry Truman's first presidential transport, and another one was John F. Kennedy's first Air Force One. 537 DC-6s and 167 military versions were built, the last of them in 1958, and this one was the second from last. It went, along with the very last one, to the Yugoslav airline jet. It was given a VIP interior for use as a staff transport by President Josip Broz Tito and other officials. It was then transferred to the Yugoslav Air Force. It carried on in that role until 1975 when it went to the Mitchell. The engine note this time, that a pair of 1700 horsepower Wright twin cyclones with 14 cylinders each. And on D-Day, it was the RAF that flew the Mitchell. There were 3 squadrons of them based at Duxford in Surrey, numbers 98, 180 and 320. The latter of them a Dutch-manned squadron, all of them part of the 2nd Tactical Air Force. And on the 6th of June 1944, B-25s attacked, for example, German troop concentrations and bridges across supply routes. Later, they went on to operate from 4 bases in France itself. This was one of the outstanding medium bombers of the war, used across pretty much all theatres. Its most famous operational exploit remains the so-called Dublin raid against Tokyo and other Japanese cities in April 1942, led by Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, and involving 16 B-25s operating off the aircraft carrier USS Fort for what was the war's first strike against mainland Japan. Its success in military terms was somewhat limited, but following the Pearl Harbor attacks a few months before, it was a significant morale boost for the US public. Demonstration of the Flying Bull's DC-6, their chief pilot for fixed-wing aircraft, and one of the best exponents of piston engine historics across Europe. Raymond B-25 was an amazingly tough airframe. It could take a lot of battle damage, and it was docile to fly, although its single-engine, low-speed characteristics could take a bit of getting used to. Una batería nueva, le dije, ponle más peso y baja más. ¿Más peso? Vamos a hacer una piedra, tío. Ponle más peso, baja más. Necesitarás menos peso. This aircraft was built just one day before the American bombing of Hiroshima in August 1945, so it's a full-time service. It was used by the US Army Air Forces and Air Force until 1958 on electronic development and training duties. It wasn't removed from the boneyard at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, Arizona until 1977. Went through various private owners, but then it was ferried to Austria in 1997 for the Flying Bulls. 25,000 hours were spent on its rebuild. This is the incredibly highly polished result. It's fully civilianised. The gun turrets have been fared over, and you might be able to spot the little weather radar that's carried under one wing, which was pretty useful, I should think, for its ferry flight from its Salzburg base right across Europe yesterday in conditions that sadly managed to beat some of our other planned overseas visitors.
Se fija con poco paso, pero mola como está ahí la prueba. Y si no lo bajo, se va. Si quieres aterrizar como lo pique, a poca velocidad. Los flaps. Aerofreno. La caída.
Meanwhile, going off the grass, we've got some aircraft from the aircraft restoration with another actually part of our show here going off elsewhere. The Bristol Blenheim, followed by the P-51D Mustang and the Spitfire PR-11.